Wednesday morning, Tel Aviv had the most sophisticated integrated air defense network in the Middle East. 7 layers, billions invested, Iron Dome proven across 2 decades. By Wednesday night, 99% of incoming targets reached impact zones. The assessment comes from verified radar data and post-strike damage analysis. Colonel Douglas Macgregor walked through what that number actually means. The word he used was not degraded. The word was blind. This is not about one battery failing. This is about the entire theory collapsing. If you have been following the Iran-Israel escalation cycle, you have been told repeatedly that Israeli air defenses are the reason restraint is possible on the Iranian side. The assumption has been that even if Iran launched, the damage would be contained. That assumption died Sunday night. What most coverage is doing right now is treating this as a tactical setback, one bad night, fixable with software patches and recalibration. What the actual assessment shows is architectural. The defense system did not malfunction. It encountered a threat profile it was never designed to counter. Military planners who spent careers building doctrine around Iron Dome supremacy are now looking at a Middle East where that supremacy is no longer assumed. What is at stake is not just Israeli security calculations. What is at stake is the regional balance that assumed certain weapons could not reach certain targets. That assumption is now in question. If you want to understand not just what failed Sunday night, but why the failure reveals a deeper structural vulnerability that changes the entire escalation picture, subscribe to Geopolitical Analysis Archive right now and turn on notifications. Let us go through this completely. Let us start with Colonel Douglas Macgregor's analysis because it is the foundation of everything that follows. Macgregor stated in his post-strike breakdown that Israeli command centers in Tel Aviv experienced a total communications blackout in the 12 minutes preceding impact. Not interference, blackout. The Iron Dome system requires continuous data link between radar detection, command authorization, and interceptor launch. That link was severed. The phrase he used, and the phrase that appears in multiple independent assessments, is electronic warfare environment. Iran did not just launch hypersonic missiles. Iran created an electromagnetic bubble that made Israeli radar and communication systems unresponsive. Read that again. The missiles were invisible not because they were too fast to track. The missiles were invisible because the tracking systems were not functioning. That is the detail that changes everything. The second piece, verified radar logs now circulating among defense analysts show that Iron Dome batteries received impact notifications, but no approach warnings. The system registered that something had exploded. The system never registered that something was coming. What this confirms is that the detection failure was not partial. Detection did not happen. For a layered defense system, losing the detection layer does not reduce effectiveness by 1/7. It reduces effectiveness to near zero because every subsequent layer depends on early warning to position and fire. The scale of the failure is the third piece, and it closes the argument. 99% of incoming targets reached impact zones. That is not a number that suggests some interceptors missed. That is a number that suggests interceptors never launched. Cross-referenced against confirmed battery locations and the known capacity of Iron Dome to handle saturation scenarios, the conclusion is unavoidable. The system was not overwhelmed. The system was offline. But the story has one more layer that changes entirely how this reads. The hypersonic missiles are not the revolution. The electronic warfare dominance is the revolution. What the coverage is missing completely is that speed alone does not defeat Iron Dome. Iron Dome has intercepted fast-moving rockets for years. What defeats Iron Dome is speed combined with the inability to see the threat coming. The framework is this. Layered defense collapses when all layers fail against the same threat profile simultaneously. Redundancy becomes irrelevant. In the current story, Iran deployed hypersonic missiles alongside electronic warfare systems that suppressed Israeli radar and communication networks. The hypersonic speed meant that even if systems came back online, there was no time to recalibrate and fire. The electronic suppression meant systems did not come online. Both conditions were necessary. Either condition alone would have allowed partial interception. Together, they produced 99% failure. The framework explains it. In the 2022 Ukrainian conflict, Russian cruise missile strikes against Kyiv faced layered Ukrainian air defenses supplied by NATO. Early strikes saw interception rates above 80%. Later strikes, after Russia deployed coordinated electronic warfare, saw interception rates drop below 40%. The mechanism was identical. Suppression of radar and communication created windows where even slower cruise missiles could penetrate. The same framework in a different theater. What to watch for using this framework? If Iran demonstrates this capability again, and Israeli defenses show the same failure pattern, that tells you the vulnerability is repeatable and architectural. If Israel successfully intercepts the next wave, that tells you either Iran did not deploy the electronic warfare component, or Israel has found a countermeasure. The outcome tells you which variable changed. The mechanism exists because modern air defense is entirely dependent on networked communication. A battery by itself can do nothing without data from radar, authorization from command, and targeting coordinates from tracking systems. Sever any link, and the chain breaks. Iron Dome is not 7 independent layers. Iron Dome is one integrated system with 7 functions. The integration is the strength when the network is intact. The integration is the catastrophic vulnerability when the network is suppressed. What the framework produces is the question nobody wants to ask. If this analysis is giving you what the daily coverage is missing, subscribe to Geopolitical Analysis Archive right now. Share this with someone who is trying to understand what is actually happening. Let us keep going. The closest historical parallel is not anything recent. It is the 1973 Yom Kippur War. In October 1973, Israeli air superiority was assumed to be absolute. The Israeli Air Force had dominated the 1967 war. Doctrine assumed that air power could suppress any ground offensive. Then Egypt deployed a SAM umbrella, Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missiles, coordinated with radar and electronic countermeasures. Israeli jets encountered an environment where their speed and maneuverability were irrelevant, because the missiles were already in the air before pilots knew they were targeted. The first 3 days of the war saw Israeli aircraft losses that shocked military planners globally. The assumption of air superiority collapsed. The parallel to Sunday night is not that missiles were launched. The parallel is that a defensive assumption, an assumption that shaped strategy for years, was proven wrong in a single engagement. In 1973, that assumption was Israeli air power cannot be challenged. In 2026, that assumption was Iron Dome cannot be bypassed. Both assumptions were foundational. Both shaped risk calculations across the region. Both were tested in combat and failed. What is different now is the speed at which the assumption collapsed. In 1973, it took 3 days of sustained combat to reveal the vulnerability. In 2026, it took 12 minutes. The other difference, in 1973, Israel adapted mid-war by deploying low-altitude attack profiles that went under the SAM umbrella. In 2026, there is no under a hypersonic missile combined with electronic suppression. The countermeasure is not tactical. The countermeasure is architectural, a complete redesign of how air defense functions in a suppressed electromagnetic environment. Let us step back from the specific strike and look at what this means for the larger trajectory. Here is what happens if Israel publicly acknowledges the vulnerability and requests immediate augmentation from the United States. In the next 48 hours, the Israeli Defense Ministry releases updated guidance to the Tel Aviv metropolitan area, acknowledging that current defenses are insufficient against certain advanced threats. The language will be carefully chosen. It will not say Iron Dome failed, but it will say additional layers are being deployed. That phrasing tells you they are managing the narrative while admitting the gap. Simultaneously, the Pentagon announces an emergency deployment of THAAD batteries and Patriot systems to Israel. In the next 2 to 4 weeks, those systems arrive and are integrated into Israeli command architecture. The public sees this as reinforcement. What is actually happening is the construction of a parallel defense network that does not rely solely on Iron Dome's radar and communication links. The U.S. systems bring their own detection and tracking, which gives Israel redundancy that is actual redundancy. Separate networks, not just separate batteries on the same network. You also see Israel begin hardening and distributing command centers. The centralized model that allowed one electronic warfare operation to blind the entire system gets replaced with a distributed model where losing one node does not collapse the chain. In the next 6 to 12 months, Israel has a functioning multi-network defense system that is significantly harder to suppress completely. Iran has demonstrated the vulnerability, but Israel has adapted. The strategic landscape shifts from Iron Dome is invincible to Israeli defenses are resilient and redundant. That is a decrease in perceived strength, but not a collapse. Deterrence is maintained because Iran knows that repeating the strike will not produce the same result. The cost of striking Israel goes back up. Restraint returns. The memorable line in this scenario, adaptation is expensive, but it is faster than replacement. Here is what happens if Israel denies the scope of the failure and continues to rely on Iron Dome mythology. In the next 48 hours, Israeli officials released statements claiming that Sunday's strike was a limited incursion and that the vast majority of threats were neutralized. The 99% failure rate is not addressed directly. Instead, the language focuses on isolated technical issues and ongoing system optimization. That language tells you they are managing domestic panic, not solving the operational problem. International defense analysts read the denial as confirmation that Israel does not yet have a solution. In the next 2 to 4 weeks, Iran begins signaling, through back channels and semi-official media, that Sunday's strike was a proof of concept and that the capability is repeatable. The signaling is deliberate. Iran wants regional actors to understand that Israeli air defenses are no longer an absolute barrier. You begin to see shifts in behavior from Hezbollah, Hamas, and other actors who previously assumed that attacking Israeli cities was strategically pointless because the defenses were impenetrable. The assumption changes. The willingness to escalate increases. In the next 6 to 12 months, Iran conducts a second demonstration strike. This time, the target is not just Tel Aviv. The target set expands to include hardened military infrastructure that was previously considered untouchable. The second strike succeeds at a similar rate. Israel is forced to acknowledge what it denied 6 months earlier. But now the acknowledgement comes after repeated failure rather than after one incident. Deterrence collapses. Regional actors recalculate what is possible. The memorable line in this scenario, denial does not restore invincibility, it just delays the reckoning. We are tracking every dimension of this here on Geopolitical Analysis Archive. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. The mainstream tells you what happened today. We tell you what it means for tomorrow. When invincibility is your strategy, one failure is total collapse. That is what Sunday night revealed. Israeli defense doctrine for 2 decades has been built on the assumption that Iron Dome provides a shield that allows freedom of action. Strikes can be launched, escalation can be managed, the population is protected. That entire theory rests on the shield functioning. The moment the shield fails, not degrades, but fails, the theory does not just weaken. The theory becomes inoperable. What Iran demonstrated was not that they could sometimes get through. What Iran demonstrated was that under specific conditions, they could totally bypass the system. Those conditions are now known. They are repeatable. That changes everything. The question that all of this leads to, and that the next 2 weeks will force an answer to, is whether the United States treats this as an Israeli problem or as a systemic problem for all allied air defenses. In the next 48 hours, watch whether the Pentagon issues updated threat assessments to U.S. forces in the region, specifically naming hypersonic missiles combined with electronic warfare as a high-priority threat vector. If it does, that tells you the U.S. has concluded that American systems face the same vulnerability and that doctrine needs to change across the board. If it does not, that tells you the U.S. is treating this as specific to Israeli network architecture and believes American systems are insulated. Both outcomes give you a clear read on how seriously this is being taken. In the next week, watch whether NATO convenes an emergency defense ministers meeting focused on air defense resilience in contested electromagnetic environments. If that meeting happens, the vulnerability is being treated as existential, not just for Israel, but for any NATO member facing adversaries with similar electronic warfare capabilities. If that meeting does not happen, the assessment is that countermeasures are available and deployable without requiring alliance-wide coordination. In the next month, watch whether Iran conducts a second strike. If it does, and the result is similar to Sunday, that closes the question. The capability is proven, repeatable, and operational. If it does not, that tells you either Iran is satisfied with the demonstration and is now using it as a diplomatic lever, or Iran is waiting to see whether Israel adapts before deciding whether a second demonstration is necessary. The development we will cover next is the first signal, the Pentagon assessment, and whether it triggers a broader doctrinal shift. When that assessment is released, the analysis will be here. Not a summary, not a headline repeat. Evidence, assessment, what it means for the trajectory, in that order. Subscribe to Geopolitical Analysis Archive and turn on notifications. What this channel provides is the mechanism behind the event. Not just what happened, but why it happened the way it did, and what that means for the next development. The mainstream gives you the surface. We give you the structure underneath. What makes this story worth tracking to its conclusion is that it represents a threshold. The moment a proven defense system is shown to have an architectural vulnerability, every strategic calculation built on that system has to be revisited. That process is happening right now across multiple militaries and multiple governments. The decisions being made in the next 30 days will shape the next decade of Middle Eastern conflict. The next video in this story will cover the first confirmed countermeasure deployment and whether it addresses the vulnerability or just adds another layer to a system that has already shown its layers can be bypassed. Evidence first, analysis second. What it means for you, always. We will see you in the next. This is Geopolitical Analysis Archive.